August 15th, 1945, 14:32 hours. American soldiers kicked down prison gates at Camp Santo Tomas, expecting enemy combatants. Instead, they found teenage girls cowering in corners, weighing 80 pounds. That's the weight of a 12-year-old child. These were grown women who had vanished into thin air 3 years ago. The gates opened, but the truth stayed buried. Private First Class Robert Chen stepped into the Manila barracks, his M1 Garand at ready position. 16 pairs of eyes stared back at him, hollow, terrified, broken. The youngest looked about 15, maybe 16. Her bones showed through translucent skin. She whispered something in Korean to the camp interpreter. Translation: "Are you going to hurt us too?" Chen dropped his rifle like it had caught fire. In 3 years of Pacific combat, Guadalcanal, Saipan, Iwo Jima, nothing had prepared him for this moment. The gates opened, but the truth stayed buried. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos pushed past Chen into the barracks. As one of only 12 female personnel in the entire Pacific Theater, she'd been rushed to Camp Santo Tomas specifically for this discovery. The smell hit her first: human waste, infection, fear. Then the visual: women sitting on bamboo platforms, wearing torn clothing that hung like sacks on skeletal frames. Their hair had fallen out in patches. Open sores covered their arms and legs. Santos had seen combat casualties. This was different. This was systematic destruction. 200,000 women. Picture this number. That's every single person in Salt Lake City. Gone, vanished, erased from existence between 1942 and 1945. Korean farm girls answered job advertisements for factory work in Japan. Filipino university students sought hospital nursing positions. Dutch colonial women looked for restaurant management jobs. Indonesian teachers applied for educational posts. None of them ever came home. The gates opened, but the truth stayed buried. Here's the math that'll make your blood run cold. Healthy women aged 16-25 weigh 110 to 120 pounds. These survivors average 80-85 pounds. That's a 35-40 pound difference per person. Multiply by 200,000 women, that's 7 million pounds of human flesh systematically starved away. 7 million pounds! The weight of 35 blue whales, simply gone, disappeared, consumed by an industrial machine designed to break human beings. Captain James Mitchell arrived at Camp Santo Tomas with the 12th Field Hospital Unit at 16:45 hours. His first medical examination lasted 4 hours. The patient, a 19-year-old Korean woman who gave her name as Number 27, had forgotten her birth name after 3 years of dehumanization. Her medical chart read like a catalogue of systematic torture: untreated gonorrhea, infected knife wounds on her thighs, evidence of multiple forced pregnancies ending in crude abortions, severe malnutrition causing muscle wasting and bone density loss. Mitchell radioed Manila Base Command for female medical staff and psychological support personnel. Base response: "We don't have protocols for this situation." 3 years into the Pacific War, the U.S. military had detailed field manuals for everything: treating combat wounds, handling enemy prisoners, managing displaced civilians, even caring for captured enemy military equipment. But nobody had written procedures for rescuing systematically brutalized sex slaves. The irony was devastating. The recruitment process revealed industrial efficiency that would make Henry Ford proud. Japanese military police issued monthly quotas to local administrators: deliver 50 women aged 14-25 by month's end, standardized transport in converted cargo trucks, regulated medical inspections by army physicians, systematic documentation with numbered identification cards. This wasn't random wartime violence. This was organized, bureaucratic evil operating like a manufacturing business with quotas, schedules, and quality control. The gates opened, but the truth stayed buried. Coming up, the 800-page document that could have changed everything, buried in Washington vaults for 50 years. Intelligence intercepts captured Japanese communications throughout 1944 and early 1945, referencing comfort station operations and recreational facility management. American codebreakers at Station Hypo translated these messages as routine military logistics, food supplies, transportation schedules, personnel transfers. Nobody recognized the euphemistic language describing systematic sexual slavery until Camp Santo Tomas opened those barracks doors. Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez interviewed survivors for the War Crimes Investigation Unit. Each woman's story followed identical recruitment patterns: false employment promises, transport to unknown locations, systematic brutalization for years. Lee Hyang-sim from Busan answered newspaper ads for textile factory work in Osaka. Maria Santos from Manila responded to hospital recruitment notices promising nursing training. Hendrika van der Berg from Java sought restaurant management positions in occupied Indonesia. The Japanese had perfected a recruitment machine operating across 12 countries and territories: Korea to Indonesia, China to Burma, the Philippines to Taiwan. A network spanning half the globe, processing women like manufacturing components. Local police delivered quotas, military transport moved human cargo, army doctors conducted medical processing. The entire Imperial Japanese military machine participated in systematic sexual slavery. The numbers get exponentially worse when you map the full network. Each comfort station held 15 to 30 women. Japanese military records, captured at war's end, document over 2,000 installations. Conservative mathematics: 30,000 women minimum, 60,000 maximum at any given time. But the system operated for 3 years with constant turnover due to death from disease, suicide, murder, and medical complications from forced pregnancies and crude abortions. For devastating comparison, the entire U.S. Army maintained 722 bases worldwide in 1945. The Japanese sex slavery network operated from 2,000-plus locations. That means their systematic rape infrastructure was nearly 3 times larger than America's global military presence. Let that sink in. The Japanese military devoted more resources to sexual slavery than the United States devoted to winning World War II. Lieutenant Colonel Frank Morrison arrived in Manila on March 15, 1945, with specific orders from Washington. Document everything related to Japanese treatment of prisoners and civilians. Between March and August 1945, Morrison compiled 800 pages of survivor testimony, medical reports, captured Japanese documents, and photographic evidence. 800 pages. That's more documentation than most war crimes trials ever received, more evidence than the Nuremberg prosecutors compiled for individual Nazi defendants. Morrison's investigation team interviewed 347 women across liberated camps in the Philippines, captured installations in Okinawa, and temporary holding facilities throughout the Pacific Islands. Each interview was transcribed in duplicate. Medical examinations were photographed and documented. Japanese documents were translated and authenticated. Military photographers created visual records of camp conditions, equipment, and systematic operational procedures. Here's where the story transforms from wartime tragedy into peacetime betrayal. Morrison submitted his complete report to War Department headquarters in Washington on August 30th, 1945. Classification stamp: top secret, sensitive, no distribution without authorization. The file disappeared into Pentagon archives within 48 hours. Not destroyed, buried. Someone in Washington decided 800 pages of systematic sexual slavery evidence were too politically dangerous for public consumption. The gates opened, but the truth stayed buried. American occupation forces in Japan discovered comfort stations containing Dutch, Australian, British, and Filipino women. Allied citizens, our own allies' daughters, wives, and sisters enslaved by the enemy. White women from European colonial families, English-speaking nurses from Allied military units, women whose governments had formal diplomatic relations with the United States. Yet prosecution efforts at the Tokyo War Crimes Tribunal focused exclusively on Japanese military leaders for conventional war crimes, not systematic sexual slavery. Why the silence? Cold War politics trumped moral obligations. By late 1945, American occupation authorities needed Japanese cooperation against emerging communist threats in China and Korea. Prosecuting systematic sexual slavery would require acknowledging that Allied colonial administrations had failed to protect their own citizens. It would expose massive intelligence failures that allowed 200,000 women to vanish without Allied forces noticing until liberation. The enforced silence lasted exactly 46 years, 4 months, and 12 days. On August 14, 1991, Kim Hak-sun stood before microphones in Seoul, South Korea, age 67, grey-haired, hands trembling with Parkinson's disease. She became the first comfort woman to publicly break nearly half a century of enforced amnesia. Her prepared testimony lasted 47 minutes, 47 minutes that shattered 5 decades of institutional memory suppression. Kim's courage triggered an avalanche across Asia. Within 6 months, hundreds of survivors in Korea, China, the Philippines, Indonesia, Burma, and Taiwan began speaking publicly for the first time. Court cases filed in Tokyo, Seoul, and Manila. Government investigations launched in 6 countries. Memorial efforts organized by human rights groups. International pressure mounting against Japanese official denials. The same evidence Morrison compiled in 1945 suddenly became front-page news worldwide in 1991. Survivor testimony, medical documentation, captured Japanese military records, photographic evidence. Nothing had changed except political willingness to confront uncomfortable truths about Allied complicity in covering up systematic wartime sexual slavery. Here's the final twist. Proving truth remains stranger than fiction. Japanese government officials throughout the 1990s claimed no documentary evidence existed, proving systematic military involvement in comfort women operations. Meanwhile, Morrison's 800-page report sat publicly accessible in U.S. National Archives since 1975. Japanese diplomatic protests demanded American proof of systematic sexual slavery, while that proof gathered dust in Washington filing cabinets. Investigative journalists found Morrison's report through routine Freedom of Information Act requests. The evidence hiding in plain sight for 50 years included organizational charts showing military command structure for comfort station operations, budget documents allocating funds for recreational facility construction, personnel orders assigning specific officers to manage comfort women transport, and medical reports detailing systematic health inspections of enslaved women. The mathematics of justice reveal brutal realities about systematic denial. 200,000 women enslaved across the Pacific Theater. Military medical records suggest approximately 25% survived the war, roughly 50,000 potential witnesses. By 1991, old age, trauma-related health problems, and social stigma had reduced that number to perhaps 200 women worldwide, willing and psychologically able to testify publicly. 200 voices speaking for 200,000 victims, one survivor representing every 1,000 women who suffered. Medical documentation reveals the systematic bureaucratization of sexual violence that defined comfort station operations. Standard medical inspections conducted every 7 days by Army physicians. Regulated quotas of forced sexual encounters based on military unit size and deployment duration. Documented punishment protocols for resistance, including reduced food rations, physical beatings, and solitary confinement. Even forced pregnancies were bureaucratized. Army doctors performed abortions according to military schedules designed to maintain operational efficiency. Japanese military communications, intercepted by Allied intelligence but classified until the 1990s, discuss comfort women operations using industrial management language. Supply chain optimization referred to transporting women between installations. Quality control measures described medical inspections and replacement procedures for sick or pregnant women. Resource allocation meant distributing women according to military unit priorities and combat deployment schedules. The network's geographic scope defies comprehension even by World War II standards. Active operations documented in every Japanese-occupied territory from Manchuria to Java, a distance spanning 4,000 miles. Installations at major military bases, forward combat positions, occupied cities, and temporary field installations. Transport networks moving women like military supplies across multiple time zones and combat theaters. Communication systems coordinating operations across thousands of miles of enemy territory. Logistical requirements for systematic sexual slavery rivaled major military campaigns. Transport capacity for moving 200,000 women required hundreds of trucks, trains, and ships. Food supplies for sustaining enslaved populations across 2,000-plus installations demanded significant agricultural resources. Medical personnel for conducting mandatory inspections required hundreds of military physicians and medical technicians. Security personnel for preventing escapes and maintaining discipline required thousands of military police and administrative staff. American soldiers who liberated comfort stations received explicit orders to maintain operational security about their discoveries. Don't discuss what you witnessed with family members. Don't write letters home describing liberated women. Don't speak with war correspondents about rescue operations involving comfort women. The same military that celebrated every victory over fascism in newspaper headlines couldn't publicly acknowledge rescuing victims of systematic sexual slavery. Military censors deleted references to comfort women from soldiers' letters, unit histories, and official reports. Photographers received orders not to document liberated women or camp conditions. War correspondents writing about liberation operations were instructed to focus on rescued male prisoners and conventional war crimes. The institutional cover-up began immediately upon discovery and continued for decades after war's end. The ultimate irony cuts deepest when comparing official American responses to Nazi versus Japanese atrocities. American forces liberating Nazi concentration camps received explicit orders to document every horror for historical record. General Eisenhower personally toured death camps and ordered extensive filming because someday some bastard will get up and say that this never happened. Military photographers created thousands of images. Army film units produced documentary footage. War correspondents wrote detailed reports for immediate publication, yet the same military buried photographic and documentary evidence of systematic sexual slavery, ensuring that bastards could indeed claim it never happened. The institutional double standard was stunning. Extensive documentation of Nazi crimes against humanity, systematic suppression of evidence regarding Japanese crimes against women. American moral authority demanded justice for Holocaust victims, while covering up evidence that could have provided justice for comfort women. Morrison's buried report contained detailed recommendations for war crimes prosecutions, survivor compensation programs, and institutional reforms preventing future systematic sexual slavery. None were implemented. The evidence that could have provided justice for 200,000 women remained locked in classified files, while Japanese officials spent decades denying systematic military involvement in comfort women operations. Survivor compensation efforts didn't begin until the 1990s, nearly 50 years after liberation. By then, most comfort women had died from age, trauma-related health complications, or suicide. The few surviving women received minimal financial assistance and no official acknowledgement of systematic sexual slavery by the Japanese military. Their governments, including the United States, had prioritized political relationships over moral obligations to systematic rape victims. Kim Hak-sun died on December 16, 1997, exactly 6 years after breaking her public silence about comfort women experiences. She lived just long enough to see her testimony inspire international recognition of wartime sexual violence as a crime against humanity. Her gravestone in Seoul carries no military honors, no government recognition, no official acknowledgement of her suffering and courage. Just her Korean name, birth and death dates, like 200,000 other women whose stories the world systematically tried to forget. International legal recognition of systematic wartime sexual slavery as a crime against humanity didn't occur until the 1998 Rome Statute establishing the International Criminal Court. 53 years after liberation, most comfort women died without seeing legal acknowledgement that their experiences constituted crimes against humanity, deserving international prosecution and compensation. The gates American soldiers opened in Camp Santo Tomas and thousands of other installations in 1945 revealed systematic crimes that military authorities immediately sealed behind classification stamps and bureaucratic silence. Evidence was collected, documented, photographed, and buried. Survivors were rescued, treated, and forgotten. Justice was promised, planned, and postponed indefinitely. 50 years later, Kim Hak-sun opened different gates: courtroom doors, legislative hearing chambers, memorial sites, and international human rights forums. Her courage forced open institutional archives that had protected perpetrators while silencing victims. Some liberations happen in dramatic moments when soldiers kick down prison doors. Others take half a century of legal battles, diplomatic pressure, and moral persistence. The comfort station gates finally opened in 1945. The truth stayed buried until 1991. The gates opened, but the truth stayed buried, until one woman's courage proved that some truths refused to stay buried forever. The gates opened, and this time the truth demanded justice. 5M.